Aloha and welcome. We're continuing on in the application attacks section. We're going to be talking about injection attacks. Injection attacks are one of my favorite. They're one of the most insidious things. I've seen them before. I've been a bad programmer and had this happen to me. So I want to share these with you so that you know what to look for and what to protect against. So when we're talking about injection attacks, we're talking about input validation attacks. These are attacks where you are allowing the users to input something and you're using those inputs without actually validating or sanitizing those inputs. You just take them, you plug them into a query on the backend server, and it goes through and you have no idea what they put in there. That is a very bad thing, because what they can do is they can put in little characters that will end the query. So they know what the query is going to look like on the back end. Oh, there's SQL queries are quite standard. They're going to be looking into the database or whatever to look for things, to make sure your username and password are, check out. So they can put in a couple of characters that will short circuit that SQL query and then do whatever they want, like, give you the user ID. Maybe it's they'll drop all of the tables, delete all your data, or they can just display it all. So these are things that you have to be very careful of. And it all comes down to, in almost all these cases, the issue is sanitizing your data, validating your inputs. That's what you need to make sure you do. You have to sanitize those inputs when they come in, because you want to make sure there's no hinky characters in there that are trying to manipulate your back end. So when we're talking about SQL queries, when we're talking about a SQL database on the back end, we're talking about SQL injections, or SQLis. So that's an injection attack in which an application's user input fields are used to insert a malicious SQL statement into the application. So by using that, they can, do all kinds of things. They can pull data, they can drop data, they can do all kinds of nastiness. So that's in the case that it's a SQL server on the back end. You also have XML injections. So XML, let's say, first of all, let's define XML. XML is Extensible Markup Language. And I've shown it to you earlier. We talked about XML before when we were talking about, I think it was authentication protocols. Or no, we were talking about SAML. So SAML uses XML, and when or an XML-like structure, and you're defining things in blocks. So you have like it's kind of like HTML in a way. You have, let's say, users, and then under users, you're going to have attributes. You'll have your first user, and you'll have attributes of a user like username, password, email address, things like that. So an XML injection attack is going to be one where, again, you've got a form, you're taking in information for a new user, and you put in, it's got username, password, email, let's say. So for username, you put in the username. An attacker would do this. They'd put in a username, a password. Then email, they would put in an email, but then they would also put in behind that XML markup language to finish off that that user, and then put in, have XML to put in a whole different user as well. So they would just specially craft it, and they would put in XML directly in there. So they're injecting this XML into your XML document, because you're saving all this in an XML document. So it's just manipulating that. So it does require an understanding of what the data looks like, and you can get a lot of that through examining examining different things that you can pull down from the website. So if you've got the knowledge of what these look like, if you have an understanding of what the data is that you're manipulating, you can do some nefarious things here. So anyway, it's kind of like SQL in a way, but you're injecting XML into it. So the next one is DLL injection. This works a little bit differently. So DLLs, if you're not familiar with Windows, there's this thing called a dynamic link library, a DLL, and that's a library of code and data that's commonly used. It's commonly used functions in Windows, and they can be used by more than one program at the same time. So you have a lot of computers that have multi-threaded or multi-core systems that can run several things at one time. So DLL helps promote code reuse, speeds up your processing, and improves your memory image. The example that they give is the comdig32.dll. That contains code and data for functions related to a Windows dialog box. So the concept of DLL injection is it's an injection attack in which a processes, something that's running, a set of instructions. It's forced to load and execute a malicious DLL within the process's address space. So within the space of that process, it's going to be forced to run this malicious DLL. So the DLL injection aims to manipulate the execution of a running process and modify the process's behavior. And the example they give is a DLL injection could be used to inject code in a running program that reads a password text box contents. So this is a bit different. This isn't injecting into forms. This is actually, getting another process to run malicious DLLs that you control. And then we've got the concept of LDAP injection. This looks a lot like SQL injection. So when we're talking about LDAP injection, so LDAP, we talked about this before. We talked about LDAP, we talked about LDAP-S, the secure version. That's a lightweight directory access protocol. It's used for accessing and maintaining distributed directory information services over an IP network. It's often used to for storing usernames and passwords. So an LDAP injection is going to be an attack in which the attacker exploits input validation vulnerabilities to manipulate an LDAP statement executed on an LDAP server. So again, you're going to have a form with username and password. And if you're not sanitizing your inputs, if you're not validating those to make sure they don't have hinky characters in there, they can go in and put a couple of hinky characters that would, close out the LDAP query and then allow them to manipulate it so that they, get access. So that's what you have to be careful of. It's the same concept as, SQL injection. You're just, you're manipulating the input to run the LDAP query in a way it wasn't intended to run. And by doing that, you can get access to information that you weren't supposed to have. So that's the bulk of our content here. SQL injections, XML injections, LDAP injections, all three of those, they work pretty much the same way. You've got a user form, you've got a form, basically the things that you input on that, they need to be sanitized, they need to be validated before you use them in either the SQL statement or the XML document update or the LDAP query to see if the username and password matches. You need to validate those inputs. Make sure there's no special characters in there. We have things in programming languages that do that. We have functions and libraries that will check that. So when you grab your input, you just say, hey, check that for me. But if you don't, then you end up with these issues. Then we've got DLL injection, which is the other one where you're trying to get another process to execute the malicious DLLs that you control. So that is it for this section. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to help. Aloha.